Hello and welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Jason L. Jones with UATV. A week ago, during the summarizing joint press conference after the Normandy Format meeting in Paris, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky invited Russian journalists to come and see the situation and sentiments of the citizens in Ukraine. Some of them have already taken the invitation. The film crew of Russian Defense Ministry's TV channel Zvezda have arrived in Kyiv at the end of the last week. At the same time, the journalists from another Russian TV channel, NTV, couldn't enter the country. To discuss the situation, we welcome to our studio Roman Golovenko, lawyer at the Institute of Mass Information. Hello. Roman, how are you doing? Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming. So yes, we were speaking a little before we started. There's a situation where, President Zelensky invited some journalists over to just kind of see how things are going here, and with the Ukrainian citizens and whatnot. And there were some issues with two of them coming in, because one had previously, for one instance, had come to the annexed Crimea in and out illegally, and kind of just, what are your thoughts on the president's invitation for this, and is it opening up a can of worms in doing so?
I think President Zelensky meant real journalists, who are persons who are practicing journalism, not propaganda, not just creating some opinions, but persons who are really working in Russian media. But when persons is trying to enter Ukraine, different aspects of their activity are taken into consideration, not only professional activity, maybe. And you have mentioned the visit in Crimea without the consent of Ukrainian state, and it is breach of Ukrainian law. And in such a case, any wishes of Ukrainian president, maybe he's very pleasant, but he is not able to deny such a norm of Ukrainian legislation. And every case should be considered separately, because yes, there are we know that in some cases the persons are covered with journalistic activity, but in fact this is Russian propaganda, or the person committed breach of Ukrainian law, like visiting occupied area, and it's very difficult to enter Ukraine after such a commitment. And
it seems that Ukraine is actually pretty popular in Russian news. According to a study in February 2019, shows that a number of publications had targeted Ukraine. One in particular had us producing 46 to 47 articles per day. Per day. Sometimes 4 articles per hour. So Ukraine's pretty popular. Why is that?
I think that because of Russo-Ukrainian conflict, and the conflict is not finished. It's maybe the situation is quite stable. Maybe it's like a frozen conflict, but it's not finished. And that's why the coverage of Russian media of Ukraine is quite huge. The same situation is in some Ukrainian media. Not all of them, but some Ukrainian media. Even just I have seen today that news that some media created a topic on where the news on Russia have been posted, and maybe it's surprising for some Ukrainian citizens, but the other part of the Ukrainian society states that we should know the situation in Russia, because in this conflict we should be able to have as much information as possible to how to predict the behavior of Russia, and to choose their line of behavior, their own line of behavior.
Okay. And do you think that, well, for one, when I think about that, do you think it's, Ukrainians who receive, news from Russia and whatnot, they're getting, you know, the right news, the like pure news or whatnot, or not tainted?
I suppose it's not totally pure, because intentionally or non-intentionally, unconsciously, majority of Russian society and majority of Russian journalists have some stereotypes on Ukraine, and it influences materials. And I think it should be better to use some independent sources if you want to get information about the Ukrainian situation or Russo-Ukrainian conflict or so on.
Okay. And so as an American who's kind of new to a lot of these things that are going on here, especially in regards to like the stereotypes, like what type of things would you say are the stereotypes that, you know, they make?
I mean, like Putin usually says, we are the same nation, Ukrainians and Russians. In fact, it denies the Ukrainian separate nation and the separate Ukrainian identity. Maybe most of Russian perceive it like we are brothers and it's a friendly statement, but in fact it's a xenophobic statement, as to my mind. And also there are a lot of stereotypes of the Soviet, especially Soviet history and war in Western Ukraine between Ukrainian insurgent army versus Soviet army and so on, about some so-called collaboration with Nazis and others. And even the present situation, we have that the examples of crucified child, so-called fake story, but in Russia people believe it because they couldn't imagine how it is possible through totally untrue, totally fake story on the news. And I know it's very difficult because of the whole range of Russian news. They usually tends to be in the same direction, covering Ukraine. But we have the situation what we have, and I think some independent sources are needed to get the truth.
Okay, and so kind of going with that, so there's a lot of misinformation, right, through this, pushing these stereotypes and whatnot. What type? So, and it looks like that's been going on since, you know, the beginning of the conflict in 2014. How do you think it's advanced from, because before, you know, there wasn't establishments like UATV and others who could, you know, shed a light inside of what's going on in Ukraine and everything. Whereas now, you know, there's a lot more protections. There's a lot more, you know, accountability that can be held with, where they, you know, can present more, I guess, they need to present more trustworthy news, or maybe not as manipulated. How would you say the Russian media has changed their tactics of presenting, you know, disinformation and propaganda against Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict?
I don't see much change in the tactics. They have changed the surname of the Ukrainian president. And you know, the President Zelensky is not so pro-Russian as he may have been regarded by some part of Ukrainian population or some Russian media and so on. And that's why I don't see much change. Yes, and you have told about the conflict in 2014, but even before it, in 2013, already have been the trade war between Russia and Ukraine. And I could not label Russian media that they were much friendly towards Ukraine before that. It's maybe even the Soviet and pre-Soviet tradition, but the 2014 is not just a starting point for these events.
Okay. So how can Ukraine go about safeguarding themselves against fake news and this type of propaganda and whatnot. I know there are certain things that are in place, like with Facebook. They're labeling misinformation and fake news and through social media. But what are some ways that Ukraine can go about safeguarding themselves?
The possible cooperation with social media is very prospective, because more and more people are getting news from social media. And as I know, the Facebook also shows his ability and wishes to cooperate, not precisely with Ukraine, but with other stakeholders. After this scandal of Cambridge Analytica and so on, they are cooperative. The other thing is that Ukraine should be more focused on pro-Ukrainian audience and European audience. We have not so much resources to spread them on the news media for the whole world, for all the languages, for all regions. But as we know, for example, a lot of post-Soviet countries are not democratic, and that's why even some Ukrainian influence on public opinion in that countries may not lead to any change in the state policy of that countries towards Ukraine. On the other side, the European countries, we should work with public opinion here for the first. And also we should analyze even inner Ukrainian audience, the part which is strongly pro-Ukrainian. It's good, but we also have the pro-Russian part of population and the middle, which is between these two sides and may switch from one to another. And some algorithms, some strategy should be worked out for this middle audience. And it's pity, but I have not seen any clear researchers, normal researchers on the issue about what the situation we have in, for example, in eastern Ukraine, in southern Ukraine, in central Ukraine. What is the share of the middle of the pro-Russian, of pro-Ukrainian audience in each region? And but it's very important, and it's not very good to make the messages, the general messages. I think the messages should be targeted to every this share of audience.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Roman, for your insights. It's really, helps a lot. So we have to get going, but hope to have you back again. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
That was Roman Golovenko. He's a lawyer at the Institute of Mass Information. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the rest.